My name is Alara. In what I can only describe as a previous life, I died in the 7th year of my relationship with a man named Kale. It wasn't a gentle passing. A flash flood, a sudden roar of nature's fury, and everything we were, was swept away in an instant of churning, muddy water. But my story didn't end there. My soul lingered, a silent, helpless witness to the aftermath. I watched Kale. I saw the vibrant, loving man I knew shatter into a million pieces. He didn't sleep, he barely ate. For 7 days and 7 nights, he searched for me with a desperation that bordered on madness, his hands raw and bleeding from digging through the debris. When they finally found my body, he simply folded, collapsing into the mud, his sobs the only sound in a world that had gone silent for him. That was the beginning of his long, slow descent into a living ghost. He tried to follow me more than once. Wrists slit, pills swallowed. Each time he was pulled back, patched up, and forced to breathe in a world that no longer held me. The director of our orphanage, the woman who had been a mother to us both, finally got through to him. She didn't tell him to move on, but to carry his love for me as a reason to live. He listened, but it was a hollow victory. He donated everything he earned, let go of all worldly attachments, and clung only to my photograph. He lived in a haze of memory and sorrow until the day he died, young and broken. On the verge of his last breath, he held my picture to his heart and whispered a vow into the silent air. In the next life, I will never let go of your hand again. Those words were the last thing I heard before I opened my eyes. I was gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from water but from disorienting bright sunlight. I was back. The sounds of a bustling bus station filled my ears. The scent of diesel and rain-washed concrete. I looked at my hands, young and unblemished. I checked the date on a discarded newspaper. It was the day the flood had happened. The memories of my past life crashed into my present with the force of a physical blow. The terror, the loss, Kale's devastating grief. It was all as real as the ground beneath my feet. But this time I had a choice. I knew what was coming. I abandoned my travel plans instantly. The wanderlust that had once defined me was extinguished by the cold fear of that memory. I gave a frantic, made-up excuse to my travel companions, my voice trembling with a panic they couldn't understand. I turned my back on the mountains I had been so desperate to see and fled in the opposite direction, my every instinct screaming at me to run. I survived. That single act of defiance against fate changed everything. Kale and I, both orphans who had found solace in each other's similar scars, found our way back together. The shared trauma of my near-miss with the flood seemed to bind him to me even more fiercely. He looked at me sometimes with a depth of feeling that stole my breath, as if his soul, even without the memories I carried, recognized how close it had come to losing me. We built a life. I consciously, deliberately clipped my own wings. The wild, fearless girl who would throw a punch for him in high school was tucked away. I became steady, dependable, a homebody. I gave up my career as a roving reporter, choosing instead a quiet, remote job that kept me safe, tethered to him. I did it all for the man who had loved me enough to want to die for me. I did it to keep the promise he had made between 2 lives. We married. For 5 years I truly believed we had won. I had cheated death and we had cheated the sorrow that had defined our ending. Our life was calm, a gentle river after the raging torrent. We talked about children, a future that stretched out, safe and predictable. The first crack in that perfect facade appeared on our 5th wedding anniversary. I was pregnant. After years of hoping and fearing disappointment, the doctor had finally smiled at me and said, "Congratulations, Alara, you're going to be a mother." The joy was a physical warmth flooding my chest. I clutched the prenatal checkup slip in my hand, a precious talisman. I decided to wait to tell Kale that night as part of our celebration. He had been secretive, promising me a special gift, something I would love. I knew what it was. A stunning sunstone necklace, carved into a teardrop, that I had admired for years. The reclusive artist who made them never sold them. But last month, Kale had taken a sudden trip abroad. Shortly after, I'd received a cryptic message from the artist's assistant, saying my husband's devotion had moved them, and they were willing to part with it for me. They wished me happiness. My heart swelled with the perfection of it all. A child on the way, a husband who would move mountains for a gift, a love that had literally transcended death. I was the luckiest woman alive. I decided to stop by the hospital on my way home to pick up some prenatal vitamins, my mind already decorating the nursery, already imagining the look on Cale's face when I told him our news. That's when I saw them. I was in the main lobby, lost in my happy days, when a commotion at the entrance broke my reverie. A man was pushing through the crowd, his voice sharp with panic. "Make way. Please make way." It was Cale. My smile started to form, a reflexive response to the sight of him, but it froze on my lips. He was carrying a woman in his arms. A young, beautiful woman I had never seen before. Her face was pale, etched with pain. Cale's expression was one of raw, terrified focus. He didn't see me. He didn't see anyone. The world had narrowed for him to this woman in his arms. As he rushed past, his shoulder knocked hard into mine. The force of it sent me stumbling, my balance lost. I fell to the cold, hard floor, my purse spilling its contents. My precious checkup slip fluttered out and was stepped on by his retreating foot. A kind nurse helped me up, handing me the now smudged slip of paper. I bent to pick it up, my hands trembling. "His girlfriend, huh?" I mumbled to myself, a weak attempt to rationalize the scene. Other people's wives and children are precious too. We'd been together for 12 years, married for 5. I would recognize him from any angle in any crowd. But that girl was a stranger. A coworker? A friend in need? A random stranger he'd helped? In that moment, a part of me, the part that still carried the memory of his soul-wrenching grief, fiercely clung to the belief that he loved me. That this was just a terrible misunderstanding. But another part, a colder, more instinctual part, was already stirring. Driven by a dread I couldn't name, I didn't go home. Instead, I secretly followed them. I saw them enter the orthopedics department and slip into a consultation room, the door left slightly ajar. Through the gap, I saw her sitting in a chair, crying softly. And I saw Cale sitting beside her, holding her hand. A clear, teardrop-shaped sunstone pendant hung around her neck, catching the fluorescent light. It sparkled, a mockery of my anniversary expectations. "It's just a light sprain," Cale was saying, his voice soft, a tone I thought he reserved only for me. "You'll be fine. It won't hurt for long." She was still frightened and he pulled her into his arms. The doctor, looking amused, said, "Your little girlfriend sure is delicate." Cale laughed. He actually laughed. He wiped her tears tenderly, coaxing her. "Yeah, so dramatic. You cry every single day." The girl pouted, hitting his chest playfully. "Cale, if you think I'm annoying, if you think I'm too dramatic, then just stop caring about me." He shook his head and the smile he gave her was so full of naked affection it felt like a physical blow. "Even if you are dramatic," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate, loving whisper I knew so well, "I still like it." Those 6 simple words, "I still like it," shattered the foundation of my world. They were enough to soothe her, enough to make the doctor chuckle. They looked like a couple deeply in love. And I, Ilara, his wife of 5 years, the mother of his unborn child, stood frozen outside the door like a thief, silently watching someone else's happiness, my own crumbling to dust in my hands. I stood there in that hospital corridor, a statue of betrayal, until the sheer force of my own humiliation finally unlocked my limbs. I turned and walked away, each step feeling like I was wading through mud. The prenatal checkup slip was still clutched in my hand, the paper now damp and crumpled from my sweat. The world outside the hospital was unbearably bright and normal. Cars honked, people laughed, the sun shone. It was an offense. How could life continue its mundane rhythm when mine had just been split into a before and after? I went home. Our home. The one we had painstakingly built together, tile by tile, memory by memory. I had chosen every piece of furniture, every paint color, envisioning a future here with him, with the family we would create. Now it felt like a beautifully decorated tomb. I sat on the sofa, the one I had lovingly picked out after visiting a dozen stores, and I didn't move. I watched the sun travel across the sky, painting the walls with shifting light until it finally faded into twilight. I had prepared for our anniversary. A candlelit dinner was waiting, the steak now cold and congealed on the table, the candles unlit. The clock ticked past the hour he was supposed to be home, then past the next and the next. At 11:52 p.m. my phone buzzed. A text from Cale. "Ilara, so sorry. An unexpected issue came up at work. I have to travel abroad to handle it immediately. Don't wait up. Don't worry. I'll make up for our anniversary and your gift when I get back. Love you. I read the message over and over. The lies were so blatant, so clumsy. Travel abroad. He was across town, probably still comforting his dramatic girlfriend. Love you. The words felt like ashes in my mouth. A strange, cold calm settled over me. Maybe I had already begun to prepare for this the moment I saw them in the hospital. The devastation was there, a vast, dark ocean inside me, but on the surface I was eerily still. I felt a perverse sense of relief. The awful, gut-wrenching suspicion was now a confirmed, terrible truth. I knew. I got up, walked to the table and blew out the imaginary candles. I picked up the plates, the cold steak, the salad that had gone limp, and I carried them to the kitchen. With a steady hand I scraped it all into the trash. It was symbolic. I hadn't even cooked it myself. I'd gone to a fancy restaurant and used Cale's credit card to order takeout, a small act of indulgence. Now its fate was the same as his promises. It belonged in the garbage. The orphanage director's wife always said I was the most stubborn child she'd ever known. When I wanted something, I would move heaven and earth to get it. But the moment I decided it was no longer worthy, I could let it go without a backward glance, no matter how deeply I had once loved it. It was a survival mechanism forged in the fires of abandonment, and it was kicking in now, a brutal and efficient internal surgeon. I lowered my head and checked the time. Midnight. Our anniversary was over. I sat back on the sofa, staring out at the pitch-black night from the balcony, seeing nothing but the reflection of my own hollowed-out face in the glass. I remembered the young, sympathetic doctor from my prenatal visit. On my way out of the hospital in a daze, I had asked for his number, telling him I might have questions. He'd said he was on duty for the next few days and that whatever I decided about the pregnancy to let him know. My fingers were cold as I typed out a text. Doctor, if I were to decide to terminate the pregnancy, how soon could it be scheduled? The reply came quickly, clinical and efficient. If you've made your decision and the preliminary exam is clear, the earliest slot is Tuesday next week. If you're sure, come to the hospital and find me. I placed a hand on my stomach, where a new life was beginning just as another was ending. Baby, I whispered into the silent, dark room, my voice breaking for the first time. Please forgive me. If there's no happy family waiting for you, then it's better for you to leave early and find another set of parents. At least you won't have to suffer from not being fully loved. The next few days were a blur of numbness. I moved through the house like a ghost. Then an invitation arrived from my alma mater. They were having a career day and wanted me, a former star journalism student, to give a speech. Cale and I had gone to different colleges in the same city. I remembered those days with a painful clarity, how he would travel for hours on weekends to see me, bringing me my favorite green grape sponge cake, and I would buy him the osmanthus milk tea that was our campus specialty. He was always so particular, hating strong wind, harsh sun, any kind of discomfort. That's why the memory of him in my past life, digging through mud with bleeding hands for 7 days, was seared into my soul. That man was gone. I accepted the invitation. I needed to do something, anything, to feel like Alara again and not just Cale's betrayed wife. I hadn't expected to see them there. Of all the places. I delivered my speech on autopilot, my voice steady even though I felt fractured inside. As I finished, a woman stood up from the audience and took a microphone. It was her. The girl from the hospital. She was even more striking in the daylight, with an air of youthful confidence that felt like a challenge. Miss Alara, hello, she said, her voice sweet but with an undercurrent of steel. I'm a third-year journalism student. My name is Chloe. The question I want to ask today isn't really related to the topic. I don't know if you're willing to answer. I knew in that moment that she knew exactly who I was. This was deliberate. I nodded, my face a calm mask. Go ahead, Chloe. She smiled, a predatory little flash. I heard you used to be a famous reporter, but you gave it all up for love and family. You've been married for 5 years. Are you happy? Are you afraid of being betrayed after 7 years? The auditorium went quiet. She had thrown down a gauntlet and every eye was on me. The old me, the fierce, hot-headed girl from the orphanage, would have vaulted off the stage and tackled her. The reborn, gentler version of me wanted to crumble. But a new version was emerging, forged in the fire of this betrayal. A woman who was both. I gripped the microphone tightly, my knuckles white, but my voice was even and clear. Love is never something you can be certain about, I began. As for the 7-year betrayal you mentioned, I've always believed that a man who truly takes responsibility for his family would never cheat. But if that day really came, I could only say he and that mistress deserve each other. I paused, letting the silence hang, then looked straight at her. Her smile had tightened. Chloe, we're both women. Tell me, do you think a mistress should feel ashamed? A ripple went through the crowd. She was trapped. She couldn't possibly defend the role. She clenched her jaw, forced a stiff nod, and tried to salvage the moment. But if that day really comes as a wife, I think that woman must be pretty useless, not even able to keep her husband's heart. I smiled again, a cold, sharp smile. Still better than being the kind of mistress who steals someone else's husband, eating someone else's leftovers without even wondering if they're filthy. People like that make a living picking up scraps and have the nerve to act proud about it. Naturally, the man isn't worth much either. If all it takes is a crook of a finger for another woman to lure him away, he's no different than a stray dog wagging its tail for a bone. I feigned surprise, covering my mouth. Oh dear, that was my fault. How could I insult stray dogs by comparing them to cheating men? Dogs are loyal companions to humans. Cheating men and their mistresses, on the other hand, are just society's trash, filthy even to look at. Don't you agree, Chloe? The color drained from her face. I had publicly flayed her, and the audience knew it. A few people snorted with laughter. I had won this battle of words, but it was a hollow victory. As I walked off the stage, my composure cracked. And then I saw them from a distance, as if fate wanted to twist the knife one more time. Cale was there, his back to me, holding a huge bouquet of roses. He was bending down toward Chloe, his body language intimate and familiar. She saw me, and like the skilled actress she was, she immediately threw herself into his arms, sobbing. He held her, his arms wrapping around her, murmuring words I couldn't hear but could easily imagine. I stood frozen, a fresh wave of pain washing over me. Then Chloe, her face buried in his chest, spoke in a voice loud enough for me to hear. Cale, why are you so good to me? He wiped her tears, his voice tender. Did you forget? I told you before. Before I met you, I kept having the same dream over and over again. In my dream, there was a girl who fell into the water. I risked my life to save her, but she disappeared. In the dream, I was in so much pain, so much that I wanted to die. Then I met you. The first time I saw you, you also fell into the water. You and that girl looked so alike. Maybe you really are the girl from my dream. And maybe what we have is fate. Something destined by heaven. The air left my lungs. I was the one carrying the memories of a previous life. Of course, I knew it wasn't just a dream, it was our truth. Was Cale's subconscious beginning to remember? He said he had loved the girl in his dream and then fallen for Chloe, but he didn't know the girl was me. And now it didn't matter. He had given our sacred, tragic history to her. He had rewritten our story with her as the heroine. A sharp, tearing pain ripped through my lower abdomen, so sudden and intense I doubled over. A hot gush of fluid spilled down my legs. People around me gasped. Someone cried out. Through a haze of agony, I saw Cale finally turn at the commotion. Our eyes met. Ilara, he called, his face a mask of shock. I didn't move. I just stared at him, wanting to sear this moment into his soul. I really, truly wanted to know what expression he would wear when he one day realized the truth. He started toward me, but then Chloe, standing a short distance away, let out a frightened yelp and collapsed onto the ground. His panic for me vanished, replaced by panic for her. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. He spun around and ran straight to her. Are you okay? He asked, lifting her. Her knee was scraped, a little red and oozing a drop of blood. It just hurts a little, she whimpered, glancing at me. Could you take me to the nurse's office first? His back stiffened. He turned back to me, his expression guilty but resolved. I'll take Chloe to the hospital first. We'll talk tonight at home, he said. He didn't give me a chance to speak. He scooped her into his arms and walked away without a single backward glance. He never once noticed the blood running down my legs, the life of our child slipping away. I drew in a ragged breath as the pain intensified, cramps seizing my body. I grabbed the arm of a student. Excuse me, I managed, my voice a thin thread of sound. Could you please call an ambulance? I can't bear the pain anymore. As the world began to go dark at the edges, I knew. It was over. All of it. The ambulance ride was a blur of sterile white and concerned faces. The pain in my abdomen was a living thing, twisting and clawing, but it was nothing compared to the hollow, silent scream inside my head. They rushed me into the emergency room, and the last thing I remembered before succumbing to a haze of painkillers was a doctor's voice saying, "We're losing the fetus." When I woke, the world was quiet and still. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a profound, aching emptiness. A different doctor, a woman with kind, tired eyes, stood by my bed. She didn't need to say anything. I knew. "I'm sorry, Alara," she said gently, placing a hand on my arm. "The pregnancy was unstable from the start. The stress and the fall, we couldn't stop the miscarriage. But you're young and healthy. You can try again in the future." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. I didn't feel the cataclysmic grief I had expected. Instead, I felt a grim, chilling sense of closure. I had already decided not to bring this child into a broken world. Fate, or perhaps the child itself, had simply agreed with my decision. This baby, our long-awaited treasure, had chosen not to live in a family where its father would run to another woman while its mother bled out on the ground. A clean break. The last tangible thread binding me to Kale was now severed. I stayed in the hospital overnight. My phone lay silent on the bedside table. Not a single call, not a single text from Kale. His silence was more eloquent than any apology could ever be. It meant he hadn't just failed to come home. He had spent the night with Chloe, utterly oblivious to the fact that he had just lost his child. The next morning I was discharged with a stack of pamphlets on post-miscarriage care and a hollow feeling in my soul. I didn't go home. I couldn't face that house, that sofa, the ghost of our life together. I booked a hotel room for a month and hired a stoic, efficient housekeeper who came 3 times a day to cook and clean without asking questions. I needed to be somewhere neutral, a blank space where I could plot my next move without the suffocating weight of our shared history. Lying in the sterile hotel bed, scrolling through photos of distant mountains and turquoise seas on my phone, I felt a flicker of my old self stir. The restless soul I had buried for Kale began to awaken. If I had never met him, I would have been there, among those peaks and oceans, not here in a rented room, mourning a love that had rotted from the inside out. It was then that a notification popped up. A new contact request on a secondary social media account I rarely used. The profile had no name, no clear picture, but a cold certainty settled in my gut. It was Chloe. I accepted. I needed to see the enemy's playbook. Her feed was a meticulously curated gallery of her triumph. It started on the day of our anniversary. June 24th. His mood isn't great today, but with me by his side he's still smiling. A photo, half of her face grinning coyly. June 25th. The weather's so beautiful today. I told him to take me to the amusement park. He said he's afraid of heights, but I patted my chest and said I'd protect him. Feels so good to be able to protect the one I love. A picture of 2 hands forming a heart-shaped shadow on a carousel. June 26th. It's drizzling today. We stayed in bed all day watching movies. A photo of a rumpled bed that was unmistakably mine. My stomach churned. He was in my house. Sleeping in my bed. The violation was so profound it felt like a physical violation. I clutched my phone, my breath coming in short gasps. I stumbled to the bathroom and dry heaved over the toilet, the emptiness inside me echoing. I took screenshots of every post, every boastful caption. But when I reached the last one, dated yesterday, my blood ran cold. I zoomed in on the background of her mirror selfie. The distinct pattern of the throw pillows, the way the light fell from the window. It was undeniable. She was lying on my living room couch, the one I had napped on for years, the one I'd chosen with so much hope. Tomorrow would be the day our divorce would be finalized, the 30-day cooling-off period having passed. I hadn't contacted Kale. I didn't need to. The evidence was my arsenal. The next morning I dressed in a simple, severe black dress. I looked like I was attending a funeral, which in a way I was. I arrived at the civil affairs office precisely on time. Kale was already there, leaning against his car. He wore a crisp white shirt, his hair perfectly styled. He had dressed up for this. I walked toward him, my heels clicking a steady, final rhythm on the pavement. "All dressed up," I said, my voice flat. "Too bad you can't get married and divorced on the same day." His head snapped up. "Alara," he began, his voice tight. "Must we do this? Must we?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. "You cheated. You got another woman pregnant, figuratively with your lies and attention, while I was carrying your actual child. You abandoned me when I was miscarrying. And now you're asking me if we must do this? Don't you see how grotesquely hypocritical that is? I tried to walk past him into the building, but he caught my arm. Alara, wait. I froze at the old nickname, a relic from our orphanage days. He hadn't called me that in years. I don't want to divorce you, he said, his eyes pleading, desperate. We've been together since we were kids. We've leaned on each other through everything. I really do love you. As for Chloe... He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of genuine torment. I don't even know how to explain it to you. Something deep inside me. A fixation I can't control. If I don't see her, I can't sleep. Can't eat. You've never felt that kind of helplessness. You don't understand what obsession does to you. The irony was so thick I could taste it, metallic and bloody on my tongue. Oh, I understand, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I had seen that helplessness in another lifetime. I knew exactly what it meant for him to be consumed by an obsession. That was why, in this life, I had given up everything to become his peace. I understand perfectly. He saw something in my eyes then, a flicker of a knowledge he couldn't place. It unnerved him. Alara, please. The name is Alara, I said, pulling my arm from his grasp. And we're done talking. The divorce procedure itself was anticlimactic. A few signatures, the stamp of a clerk, and it was over. The certificate felt flimsy in my hand, a poor representation of the life it was dissolving. As we walked out into the sunlight, I didn't head for my car. I walked straight to his. Get in, I said. He stared at me, bewildered. What? I want to go back to the house. Our house. My house, I corrected myself. According to the divorce agreement you signed, you leave with nothing. That includes the right to live there. But I have a feeling you haven't been respecting that. The drive was silent and tense. When we pulled up, I didn't need a key, the door was unlocked. We rang the bell and a moment later it swung open. There stood Chloe, barefoot, wearing my silk pajamas, clutching my favorite stuffed animal, a worn-out teddy bear from the orphanage. Her face lit up in a soft, playful smile. Cale, you're back, she began, but her voice died the instant she saw me standing behind him. Her smile vanished, replaced by a mask of petulant defiance. What are you doing here? According to the divorce agreement, I said, my voice calm as a dead sea, Cale leaves with nothing. That means this house belongs to me. So, by law, you're trespassing. Her eyes instantly welled with tears. She turned to Cale, her lower lip trembling. Cale, I already called my roommate, but she still refuses to let me come back. I really have nowhere else to go. If I can't stay here for a little longer, I'll end up on the streets. Cale looked from her pleading face to my stony one, conflict warring in his eyes. All his assets were already mine. He had nothing. Alara, he said, turning to me with a sigh of exasperation as if I were the unreasonable one. I've already given you everything. The house, the money. But right now she doesn't have a place to stay. Can't you just let her stay here for a few more days? Just a few days. Okay. I looked at him, this man who had once been my entire world, now begging me to house his mistress. The last vestige of any soft feeling for him evaporated, leaving behind only a cold, hard determination. Okay, I said immediately. My decisiveness startled both of them. They stared at me, waiting for the catch. Just let me get some important documents from the bedroom, I said smoothly. I walked past them, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from pain, but from a furious, focused energy. I went to the bedroom, but not for documents. From my purse, I took a tiny magnetic device and discreetly pressed it to the underside of the metal bed frame. A hidden camera. I had come prepared. I walked out of the bedroom, documents in hand, and gave them a curt nod. A few days, I repeated, then turned and left, not looking back. I didn't go to my hotel. I went straight to the university, to the administrative building for the journalism department. I knew the rhythms of this place. I found a bench in a busy corridor right when classes were changing. I took out my phone, opened the live feed from the camera, and waited. It didn't take long. Within the hour they were on the bed, entangled, kissing, laughing. The footage was clear, damning. I didn't say a word. I simply sat there, silent, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of grief, but of pure, undiluted rage. I held my phone up, making sure every student, every professor passing by, could see the video playing on a loop. I also had my prenatal checkup slip and the miscarriage medical certificate on my lap, the dates clearly visible. The whispers started, then grew into a wave of scandalized murmurs. I was a silent bomb, detonating in the heart of her world. By the time I stood up and walked away, the damage was done. Chloe Carter's reputation was in tatters. My phone started ringing before I even reached the airport. It was Cale. I answered, holding the phone slightly away from my ear. "Ilara," he roared, his voice raw with fury. "I never thought you'd be such a cruel woman. You promised. You promised you wouldn't release the video. And you went to her school. You've ruined her. How could you do this? And you installed a camera. That's an invasion of privacy. I could sue you. And more than that, Ilara, you've driven Chloe to jump into a river. Do you understand? She tried to kill herself. If you have any conscience at all, you will go to her school right now and explain that it was all your wild speculation. Clear her name or I swear I'll go to the police." I waited for his tirade to subside, the silence on my end somehow louder than his shouting. "You signed the divorce papers yourself," I said, my voice chillingly calm. "By law that house belongs to me. So, what's wrong with me installing a camera in my own home? You two were the ones who couldn't control yourselves in my bedroom. I accidentally saw it, so I took it to her teachers to clarify. And another thing, yes, I did promise you. I really did break that promise. So what? Call the police, Cale. Go ahead. If they get involved, who do you think will be humiliated? I'm sure you know better than I do. In this relationship, I'm not the one at fault. I don't have to take responsibility for your mess." I hung up, then immediately made another call. "Hello," I said to the courier service. "I need to send 2 express packages. Same-day delivery." I had already prepared them. One was for Cale. Inside were 2 documents, the confirmation of pregnancy and the medical record of my miscarriage, the dates circled in red. Let him live with that. The other, more important package was a USB drive containing all the financial data and proprietary secrets I had access to from our shared accounts and his carelessly left home computer. I sent it to his most ruthless competitor. Then I turned off my phone, picked up my single suitcase and boarded a plane to another city. The war was over. I had scorched the earth behind me. Now it was time to see what could grow from the ashes. The city I landed in was coastal, its air thick with the smell of salt and impending rain. I'd chosen it for a reason. My memories from my previous life were not just of Cale's grief. They were a tapestry of events, large and small. I knew that in 2 months, this very city would be hit by torrential rains, leading to a devastating flood. It wouldn't be as catastrophic as the one that took my first life, but it would be deadly enough. I rented a small, secure apartment on a hill, overlooking the vulnerable lower-lying districts. My first order of business was not to settle in, but to write. I spent days in the local library researching geological surveys, weather patterns, and urban drainage systems. I composed dozens of anonymous, meticulously detailed letters, citing potential risk zones and a specific narrow time frame. I sent them to the local emergency management bureau, the mayor's office, every news outlet I could find. I used all my old reporting skills to make the warnings sound credible, urgent. I had to try. I couldn't save myself in my first life, but maybe I could save others in this one. In the ensuing weeks, the silence from my old life was a balm. I ignored the barrage of calls and texts from Cale that had surely piled up once he turned his phone back on. The package with the medical records would have been delivered. The USB drive would have been exploited by his competitor. He was likely reeling, his professional life in freefall, his personal life a public scandal. I felt no satisfaction, only a cold, quiet finality. I focused on healing. Physically, my body recovered quickly from the miscarriage. Emotionally, it was a slower process. The betrayal was a deep bruise that ached in the quiet moments. But with each passing day, the memory of Cale's face grew fainter, replaced by the vibrant colors of my new surroundings. I started taking long walks along the coast, the vast, untamable ocean a reminder that there was a world beyond my pain. I began to plan. The money from the divorce settlement was substantial. It was blood money stained with sorrow and betrayal, but it was also my freedom. I bought maps, guidebooks, started learning snippets of new languages. The restless soul I had suppressed for so long was stretching its wings, eager for the sky. Meanwhile, the local authorities, to their credit, had taken my anonymous warnings seriously. Or perhaps the data was simply too compelling to ignore. Evacuation orders for the most flood-prone areas began to appear. The city was preparing. A part of me, the part that still felt responsible for Kale's downfall, felt a small sense of redemption. I was using my cursed knowledge for good. The day the rains came, it was with a biblical ferocity. The sky opened up and water fell in solid, relentless sheets. From my window, I watched the streets below slowly turn into rivers. The evacuations had been mostly successful, but news reports spoke of holdouts, of people trapped by the rapidly rising water. Driven by a compulsion I didn't fully understand, I pulled on a waterproof jacket and boots. I had trained for this. In the 5 years of my marriage, haunted by the memory of my death by water, I had become a strong swimmer and learned basic rescue techniques. It was my secret insurance policy against fate. Now it was a tool. I waded into the chaotic water-filled streets, joining the efforts of emergency crews and volunteers. For hours, it was a blur of pulling people from cars, helping the elderly to higher ground, the cold water numbing my body but not my resolve. I was saving lives. It was the most alive I had felt in years. And then, as I was helping a family onto a rescue boat, I heard it. A faint, desperate cry for help from a half-submerged building downstream. Ignoring the shouted warnings from a firefighter, I swam toward the sound, my muscles burning with fatigue. There, clinging to a waterlogged wooden beam, was Kale. The shock was so profound it nearly made me sink. He was gaunt, his face haggard and etched with a terror that went beyond the immediate danger. And in his arms, clutching his neck and sobbing hysterically, was a little girl no more than 5 or 6, wearing a sodden blue dress. Our eyes met over the churning water. His widened in disbelief, then in a dawning, impossible recognition that seemed to eclipse even his fear. "Elara," he gasped. I didn't have time for shock or recrimination. The little girl's life was at stake. I fought my way through the current to them. "Give her to me," I shouted over the roar of the water. He hesitated for a split second, then transferred the small, trembling form into my arms. I held her tight, turning my back to the current and using my body as a shield as I kicked towards the waiting boat. Strong hands pulled us aboard, wrapping the girl in a thermal blanket. I turned back to see Kale losing his grip on the beam. With a final, furious surge of energy, I plunged back in, grabbing his arm just as the water threatened to drag him under. Together, we floundered towards the boat, and he was hauled unceremoniously to safety. He collapsed on the deck, coughing up water, his body shaking uncontrollably. He looked broken, utterly defeated. The rescue workers attended to him, but his eyes never left me. Later, outside the makeshift emergency shelter set up in a gymnasium, he found me. I was wrapped in a blanket, sipping a hot drink, watching the rain finally begin to subside. "Elara," he said, his voice a ragged whisper. He was still in his soaked clothes, a pathetic figure. "When did you realize?" I knew what he was asking. I cut him off. "It doesn't matter." "But it does," he insisted, a desperate energy animating him. "I've been dreaming for so long. Then I met Chloe. I thought she was the girl from my dreams, and then we divorced. Those days after, I barely slept trying to chase that dream, but I could never see the girl's face. After I got the divorce certificate, Chloe jumped into the river. I jumped in after her. That night, I developed a high fever and I was hospitalized. Then I saw the medical records you sent me." He stopped, his breath hitching. "That night I dreamed of so many things. I still couldn't see the face clearly, but I knew the girl in my dream wasn't Chloe. After that, memories started to awaken. Fragments. The flood. The grief. Vain. I knew this city would flood at this time. I didn't know if it was real or just a dream, but I had to come. I had to see for myself. I didn't expect to find a real flood. And when the waters dragged me under, I saw that little girl in the blue dress. She looked so much like the girl from my dreams. At that moment, I closed my eyes, and your image appeared in front of me." He let out a broken, self-mocking laugh. Then my mind filled with so many images, like I'd already lived an entire lifetime. And this life, the one I begged for, the happiness I prayed for, I lost it with my own hands. By the time he finished, he was crying, tears mingling with the rainwater on his face. The hate and pain in his eyes were for himself. He reached out a trembling hand to touch me. I stepped back, avoiding his touch as if he were diseased. "Kale," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. I once thought this life was the chance heaven gave us. But now I realize maybe heaven was trying to tell me. Life and death, separation and farewell. That was always the ending written for us. In each other's memories, our deaths preserved the most beautiful images of who we were. But now we're both alive. And the love we once thought sacred has, because of you, rotted into something unrecognizable. He shook his head frantically. Alara, I just mistook the person. But from beginning to end, the one I've loved has always been you. So what? I asked, the question hanging in the damp air. Does that mean I'm supposed to forgive your betrayal? I can't. I'm not that magnanimous. I can't forgive the man who betrayed me. I looked him straight in the eyes, my gaze unwavering. You betrayed me first, so I made you walk away with nothing. I used your competitors to destroy your career. All your years of work are gone. You have nothing left. This is my punishment for you. And all the pain and regret you feel now for the rest of your life, every night you'll remember it in your dreams. Kel, I will never forgive you. The child who came into this world and then left will never forgive you. So spend the rest of your life drowning in that. I took a final, steadying breath. As for me, I'm going on. I'm going to chase my dream. I'm going to travel the world. I have plenty of money now, enough to live my life without struggling in misery anymore. I turned away from him then, from his tears, his devastation, his reckoning. I walked away from the flood, from the past, from him. I didn't look back. My future was waiting. The first few months of my travels were a study in sensory overload. I started in places that were the absolute antithesis of everything I had known. Vast, silent deserts where the sky was a bowl of infinite stars, and ancient, bustling Medinas where the air was thick with the scent of spices and the cacophony of life. I learned to haggle in broken Arabic, got hopelessly lost in winding alleys, and drank sweet mint tea with strangers who became fleeting friends. I didn't just see the world, I immersed myself in it. I volunteered at an elephant sanctuary in Thailand, the sheer physicality of caring for the gentle giants scrubbing away at the lingering numbness inside me. I learned to scuba dive in the Philippines, surrendering to the weightless silence of the deep blue, a world where the past couldn't reach me. With every new stamp in my passport, a little more of the old Alara, the one who had built her life around a man, was chipped away, and the original, unvarnished version began to re-emerge. The money gave me freedom, but it was my will that gave me purpose. I was no longer the woman running from a flood or a betrayal. I was a woman running towards something, though I didn't yet know what. I was collecting pieces of myself I had forgotten I'd lost. My courage, my curiosity, my right to take up space. Occasionally, news from my old life would trickle in through the digital ether. I never sought it out, but sometimes an algorithm would push a familiar name into my feed. Chloe Carter had indeed been pressured to withdraw from the university. The scandal had been too public, too salacious. The roommate I'd inadvertently empowered had become a relentless source of gossip, and the story had even briefly trended in the city. The girl who had studied night and day to escape a small-town fate found herself back in her hometown, her reputation in tatters, her future irrevocably altered. I felt a flicker of something, not quite pity but a cold acknowledgement of cause and effect. She had played a dangerous game and lost everything she had fought for. Cale's downfall was more severe. The package I'd sent to his competitor had been a master key to his professional demise. They had used the information ruthlessly, undercutting his bids, poaching his clients, and exposing several ethically questionable practices he'd kept hidden. His business, the one he had built from nothing, the source of so much of his pride, collapsed like a house of cards. He was unhireable, blacklisted in his industry. Then a darker piece of news surfaced months later, buried in a local news blog. Cale had been attacked. A former client, ruined by the corporate fallout, had ambushed him. The report was vague, but it mentioned numerous puncture wounds from a sharp, non-lethal instrument. The attacker had been precise, aiming to maim, not kill. Cale had been hospitalized, but treatment for nerve damage had been delayed. The result was permanent, partial paralysis. He was confined to a wheelchair. I read the article in a quiet cafe in Lisbon, the morning sun warm on my face. The news should have brought a sense of vindication, but it didn't. It felt empty. The man I had loved across 2 lifetimes was now a broken figure, his body as crippled as his spirit. The punishment I had wished upon him had been delivered, but by a stranger's hand. It felt less like justice and more like a grim, inevitable conclusion to a tragedy he had authored himself. I closed the browser and finished my coffee. His suffering was no longer my burden to carry. He was a ghost from a story that was finished. A year bled into two. I learned to surf in Portugal, painted in a small studio in Italy, and trekked through the Himalayas. I had flings with interesting men who asked for nothing more than a few days of companionship. I laughed more. The deep, aching sorrow that had been my constant companion began to recede, replaced by a steady, quiet contentment. It was in a small coastal town in Mexico, while I was helping a local marine biologist track sea turtle nests, that I had the dream. I was back in the floodwaters of my first life. The churning, muddy water was pulling me under, the panic as fresh as if it were yesterday. But this time I wasn't alone. I saw Cale on the riverbank, but he wasn't the grief-stricken man from my memories. He was the Cale from our early days, young and strong. He was reaching for me, his face a mask of desperation, but his feet were rooted to the spot. And then I saw myself, my current self, strong and sure, swimming not away from the current but with it. I wasn't fighting the water. I was using its power, navigating it, until I reached a calm, sun-drenched shore I had never seen before. I woke with a start, the sound of the ocean, a gentle rumble outside my cabana. The dream wasn't frightening. It was clarifying. I had spent 2 lifetimes defined by that flood and the man connected to it. But the dream told me I was no longer the victim, nor was I the avenger. I was the survivor, the navigator. I had finally reached the other side. I got out of bed and walked to the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. A profound sense of peace settled over me. The journey wasn't about escaping Cale or my past. It was about outgrowing it. I decided to put down temporary roots. I rented a small, bright casita in that Mexican town for 6 months. I continued my work with the turtles, I made friends with the locals, I learned to make proper tortillas. For the first time since my rebirth, I wasn't running or hiding. I was simply living. One evening, as I was writing in my journal about the day's events, my phone rang. It was an international number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would let it go to voicemail, but a strange intuition made me answer. Hello. There was a pause, then a woman's voice, frail and aged, but unmistakable. Alara? My dear girl, is that you? It was Mrs. Albright, the director's wife from the orphanage. The woman who had been a mother to us both. My throat tightened. Mrs. Albright? Yes, it's me. Is everything all right? Oh, my dear, she said, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry to call you like this. I know you're away. But I thought you should know. It's Cale. I closed my eyes. What about him? He's in the hospital again. His body, it's not handling the paralysis well. There's an infection. The doctors, they're not sure he'll pull through this time. She took a shaky breath. He's been asking for you. He's lucid one moment, delirious the next. But he keeps saying your name. I know what he did, Alara. I know he doesn't deserve your forgiveness. But he's so alone. I was silent, listening to the waves crash in the distance. The news should have stirred something, anger, pity, resentment. But all I felt was a vast, calm distance. Mrs. Albright, I said softly. Thank you for telling me. You were always so kind to us. Will you come? She asked, a thread of hope in her voice. I looked out at the dark ocean, at the pinpricks of light from the fishing boats. I thought of the dream of finally reaching the shore. No, I said, my voice gentle but firm. I can't. My place is here now. Please. Please give him my regards. There was a long silence on the other end. Then a soft sigh. I understand, child. I think I always knew you were the stronger one. Take care of yourself, Alara. Be happy. I am, I said, and realized with a start that it was the absolute truth. Goodbye, Mrs. Albright. I hung up the phone and placed it on the table. I felt no guilt, no second thoughts. The chapter was closed. The man who was dying in a hospital bed was a stranger. The boy I had loved, the man who had grieved for me, the husband who had betrayed me, they were all ghosts. I picked up my journal and finished my entry. Then I walked outside barefoot onto the cool sand. The moon was full, casting a silvery path across the water. I breathed in the salty air, feeling the fine grains of sand between my toes. I was free. Not from a person but from a story. My story was my own now, and it was just beginning. The call from Mrs. Albright was the final soft click of a lock sealing shut. After that, A profound and lasting serenity descended upon my life. The lingering shadows of my past, which had once stretched long and dark, finally receded under the bright, unwavering sun of my present. I stayed in the Mexican coastal town for another year. My temporary roots grew deeper, stronger. I became a fixture in the community, no longer just a visitor. The local children called me La Tortuga, the turtle lady, and I taught them English in exchange for Spanish lessons that rapidly evolved beyond simple pleasantries. I learned about their lives, their dreams, and in doing so I stopped dwelling so much on my own. I used a portion of the divorce money to fund a proper, weatherproofed hatchery for the sea turtles and help set up a small education center. It was tangible, good work. It felt like an atonement not for any sin I had committed, but for the years I had spent living a small, confined life. I was giving back to the world, and the world in turn was filling me up. Occasionally I would allow myself to think of Kale. Not with bitterness, but with a strange, detached curiosity. I wondered if, in his final moments, his memories had fully aligned, if he had seen the entire tragic tapestry of our two lives laid out before him. I hoped, for his sake, that he had found some measure of peace in that understanding before the end. I never checked to see if he had passed away. It no longer mattered. His story was his own to conclude. Mine was mine to continue. When the wanderlust stirred again, it was a different kind of impulse. It wasn't a frantic escape, but a gentle tug towards new experiences. I packed my single suitcase, said heartfelt goodbyes to my friends, and moved on. I spent a season in Japan, living in a minimalist apartment in Kyoto. I studied ikebana, the art of flower arranging, learning the discipline of creating beauty through simplicity and space. The quiet, deliberate practice was a meditation. I walked through ancient temples, the silence of physical presence, and felt the weight of centuries that had nothing to do with me. My own dramas felt blessedly small and fleeting. From there I went to Iceland. I rented a 4x4 and drove the ring road, camping under the shimmering curtains of the aurora borealis. I hiked across glaciers and soaked in geothermal pools, the raw, untamed power of the landscape mirroring the fierce independence I had cultivated within myself. I took photographs not as a tourist but as an artist, capturing light and shadow, ice and fire. I was alone, but I was never lonely. Solitude, I discovered, was not the absence of company but the presence of oneself. And I had become someone I genuinely enjoyed being with. During my travels I started a blog. Not a personal diary but a collection of essays and photographs about the places I saw, the people I met, the small, profound lessons I was learning. I wrote about the resilience of the turtles, the silence of the Japanese gardens, the humbling vastness of the Icelandic wilderness. I wrote about learning to be still, and I wrote about the courage it takes to keep moving. I never mentioned Kale or the orphanage or the life I had left behind. This was a record of my new world. To my surprise, the blog found an audience. People wrote to me telling me my words inspired them to take their own journeys, both external and internal. A small, independent publisher contacted me, asking if I would be interested in turning the blog into a book. I was in a small village in the Scottish Highlands when I received the email. I was staying in a cottage with a peat fire, working on a series of essays about the concept of home. The offer felt like a culmination, a validation that my path, though unorthodox and born of pain, had meaning beyond my own healing. I accepted. For the next 6 months I settled in a cozy flat in Edinburgh and wrote. The book, which I titled The Uncharted Shore, was part travelogue, part memoir of self-discovery. It was my story, stripped of its specific painful particulars and distilled into its universal essence. The journey from being defined by others to defining oneself. The day I held the first printed copy in my hands was a quiet milestone. It was a physical manifestation of my rebirth. Elara was no longer a ghost, a wife, or a victim. She was an author, an explorer, a woman whole unto herself. The book was modestly successful. It didn't make me famous, but it connected me to a community of kindred spirits. I was invited to give talks at bookstores and travel festivals. I stood on those stages, a different woman from the one who had been publicly shamed by Chloe at my alma mater. I was confident, grounded, and spoke from a place of hard-won peace. At one such event, a young woman approached me after the talk. Her eyes were wide and earnest. "Your book, it changed my life," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I was in a difficult situation. I felt trapped. Reading your words gave me the courage to leave. To start over. Thank you. She looked at me as if I had handed her a lifeline. And in a way I suppose I had. My story, once a source of such private agony, had become a source of strength for someone else. The irony was not lost on me. The very act of saving myself had allowed me to throw a rope to another. I left the event feeling a profound sense of completion. The circle had closed. The pain had been transformed, alchemized into something useful, something beautiful. That night, back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and booked a one-way ticket to a place I had never been, Namibia. I wanted to see the red dunes of Sossusvlei, to feel the ancient arid breath of the desert. As I closed the laptop, I caught my reflection in the dark screen. I saw a woman with sun-kissed skin, eyes that had seen both profound sorrow and immense beauty, and a smile that was entirely her own. The girl from the orphanage, the woman who had died in a flood, the wife who had been betrayed, they were all part of me, layers of sediment that had formed the bedrock of who I was now. But I was no longer any of them. I was simply Alara. And my life, with all its uncharted shores still waiting, was finally, completely my own. Namibia was a landscape of profound silence. It was a different quiet from the Japanese temples. This was an ancient, pre-human silence, carved by wind and time. Standing on the crest of a towering red dune at dawn, watching the light bleed across the vast empty expanse, I felt a final lingering fragment of my old self dissolve into the thin, cool air. There was no room for the echoes of a broken love here. There was only the earth, the sky, and me. I traveled deep into the desert with a small guided group. We camped under a blanket of stars so dense and bright it felt like a physical ceiling. Around the campfire, the other travelers shared their stories. A doctor taking a sabbatical, a couple celebrating their retirement, a young man finding himself after college. When it was my turn, I simply said, "I'm a writer." It was the truest, most complete summary I had ever been able to give. From the desert, I flew to the verdant chaos of India. The sensory shock was exhilarating. I spent weeks traveling by train, watching the world fly by my window in a kaleidoscope of color and life. In Varanasi, I sat on the steps of the Ganges at sunrise, watching the rituals of life and death play out with a raw, unvarnished honesty. The cycle felt natural here, not tragic. It cemented the feeling that had been growing in me for years. My life with Kale was not a tragedy interrupted, but a cycle that had completed itself. It was in a quiet hill station in the Himalayas months later that I received the final piece of news. A letter from Mrs. Albright, forwarded through my publisher. Her handwriting, once bold and sure, was now a spidery scrawl. My dearest Alara, I hope this letter finds you well and happy in your adventures. I follow your career with such pride. You have become the remarkable woman I always knew you could be. I write with sad news. Kale passed away 2 weeks ago. The infection finally overwhelmed his system. It was, the doctor said, peaceful in the end. There is something I must tell you, something he made me promise to convey if I ever had the chance. In his last days he was remarkably clear. He said to tell you that he remembered everything. The flood, the grief, the promise. He said the moment of total clarity came not when he was in the water here, but when he saw you in that hospital corridor bleeding and he chose to turn away. He said in that moment his soul recognized its mistake and its failure in the most agonizing way. He said his punishment was not the wheelchair or the loss of his business, but the full, unbearable weight of that memory returned to him too late. He asked for your forgiveness not because he deserved it but because he wanted you to know that he finally saw you. The real you. The one he loved across 2 lifetimes. He said his only comfort was knowing that you had escaped the story he trapped you in, and that you were living a life so full and bright. Do not be sad, my dear. His suffering is over. And your living as you are, is the greatest tribute to the love you once shared. With all my love, Mrs. Albright. I folded the letter and held it in my lap for a long time. I looked out at the mist-shrouded peaks, feeling nothing at first. Then a single warm tear traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't grief for the man he became or even for the love we lost. It was a tear for the 2 orphans who had found solace in each other, for the beautiful, painful, impossible complexity of it all. It was a tear of release. I took the letter outside and, using a match from the fireplace, set it alight. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the words turning to smoke that drifted up and was carried away by the mountain wind. It was not an act of disrespect but of ritual. I was burning the last page of that old book. With his death, the final tether was severed. The story was truly, definitively over. I stayed in the Himalayas for another month, trekking to remote monasteries, learning about the Buddhist concept of non-attachment. It resonated deeply. I had not achieved it through meditation, but through the brutal, practical curriculum of life and death. When I descended from the mountains, I felt lighter than I ever had. The world seemed sharper, more vivid, as if a filter had been removed from my eyes. My travels continued, but the quality of my journey shifted yet again. The frantic energy of my initial escape had long since faded, replaced by the steady purpose of my writing, and now, it evolved into a state of pure, joyful immersion. I learned to sail in the Greek islands, feeling the thrill of harnessing the wind. I worked on a vineyard in Argentina during the harvest, my hands stained with purple juice, my body tired but satisfied at the end of each day. I fell in love with a Danish architect in Copenhagen for 3 glorious months, and when our paths amicably diverged, I felt no devastation, only gratitude for the time we had shared. I was no longer building a new life to replace the old one. I was simply living my life, one that was rich, dynamic, and entirely on my own terms. The past was no longer a country I had fled. It was a distant landmark, visible but without the power to pull me back. Years slipped by with a gentle fluidity. My hair began to be threaded with silver and lines appeared around my eyes, not from worry, but from squinting at too many sunsets and laughing too often. I bought a small, sun-drenched cottage on a cliffside in Portugal, a place to return to between journeys, a home I had chosen for myself, for no one else. One afternoon I was in my garden pruning the bougainvillea when my phone buzzed. It was a message from the marine biologist in Mexico. Attached was a photo of a group of children, the new generation of Tortuga volunteers, releasing a hatchling sea turtle into the ocean. The caption read, "Another one finds her way. Has your spirit." I smiled, my heart swelling with a quiet, profound joy. I looked out at the endless Atlantic, the same ocean that touched the shores of my past and my present. I thought of the little turtle, driven by an ancient instinct, navigating the vast, unpredictable sea to find her place in the world. I had done the same. I had been swept away, I had been lost, I had fought my way to the surface. And now I was here. Not just surviving but thriving. The echo in the silence was finally still. There was only the sun on my face, the scent of the flowers, and the deep, abiding peace of a journey complete, and yet, wonderfully, never truly over. The cottage in Portugal became my anchor, but the sea remained my siren song. I no longer traveled with the relentless pace of before. Now my journeys were slower, more deliberate. I would spend 6 months at home writing, tending my garden, hosting friends I had made across the globe, and then I would set off for a single deep immersion in one place. I spent a season in a small village in Vietnam, learning the secrets of their cuisine from a formidable grandmother who tolerated my clumsy knife skills with good-natured exasperation. I wrote a series of essays about food as memory, about the stories simmered into broths and kneaded into dough. The book that followed, A Taste of Place, was even more successful than my first. I was no longer just a travel writer. I was a chronicler of the human experience, seen through the lens of place and ritual. The success brought a new kind of freedom. I set up a small grant for women from disadvantaged backgrounds who wanted to travel, to find their own uncharted shores. It felt like the most meaningful way to honor my own tumultuous path, to become the kind of foundation I had never had. One crisp autumn day, I was invited to speak at my old university. The irony was not lost on me. The last time I had stood on a stage here, I was being publicly challenged by my husband's mistress, my world crumbling around me. This time the auditorium was packed. I saw eager young faces, filled with the same ambition and anxiety I had once known. I spoke not of betrayal or loss, but of resilience. I spoke about the courage to let go of the story others write for you and to pick up the pen yourself. I talked about the world as a teacher and solitude as a gift. I read a passage from The Uncharted Shore about the sea turtles, how they are born knowing the path to the ocean, but must run the gauntlet of predators to reach it. The journey is the point, I told them. The scars you collect are not signs of failure, but proof of your passage. And the shore you finally reach, it might not be the one you first set out for, but it can be more beautiful than you ever imagined. After the talk, a long line of students waited to speak with me. One young woman with fierce, intelligent eyes, lingered at the end. "Ms. Alara," she began, her voice steady. "My name is Sarah. I was wondering your grant. I've applied for it. I want to document the stories of women in post-conflict zones." I looked at her, at the fire in her gaze, and I saw a reflection of my own younger, wilder self. Not the tamed version I had become for Kale, but the true, untamable spirit. "Tell me more," I said, and we talked for a long time as the auditorium emptied around us. I knew with a deep certainty that she would get the grant. That evening I took a walk through the campus alone. The ghosts were quiet. The places that had once held so much pain now felt neutral, just old bricks and mortar. I found the spot where I had miscarried. A new student dormitory stood there now, bright and anonymous. I felt nothing but a gentle, forgiving sadness for the young woman I had been, and for the lost potential of the child who had never been. I had dinner with a few of my old professors now retired. They spoke of Kale in hushed, pitying tones. I listened, but his name no longer had the power to lacerate. He was a historical figure, a character in a sad tale from long ago. Returning to my cottage a week later felt like coming home in the truest sense. This was my sanctuary, my creation. I poured a glass of local wine and sat on my terrace, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in a final, spectacular blaze of orange and purple. My life was full. I had love, not the consuming, dramatic love of my youth, but the steady, deep affection of true friends scattered across the continents. I had work that was meaningful and fulfilling. I had a home that was a reflection of my soul. I had peace. I thought about the concept of a happy ending. It's a misnomer, I decided. There is no ending, only a continuous series of beginnings. The happy part isn't a destination you arrive at. It's the quality of the journey itself. It's the ability to find joy in a sun-warmed wall, satisfaction in a well-tended garden, wonder in a new horizon. I had spent my first life defined by a man's love, and my second life defined by his betrayal. But this life, my true life, was defined by me. I had navigated the torrents of memory and grief, not by fighting them but by learning to swim and eventually to sail. The shore ahead was still uncharted, and that was its greatest gift. There were still mountains I hadn't climbed, oceans I hadn't crossed, stories I hadn't written. The difference was I was no longer running from or toward anything. I was simply exploring with an open heart and a quiet mind. I took a sip of my wine, the taste of the sun and the earth on my tongue. The last light of day faded, and the first stars began to prick the deep blue velvet of the night. A soft, cool breeze rustled the leaves of the olive trees in my garden. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of the sea and the jasmine I had planted. I was finally and completely home. Not in a place but in myself. And I knew with a certainty that felt as vast and eternal as the sky above, that whatever lay on the next uncharted shore, I was ready for it. The end.